Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this PI webinar on what is the new normal for shared living post-COVID-19. My name is Callum Quinn. I'm a reporter with the PI News. I'm going to be chairing this webinar. Before we start and I introduce our guests, I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping sort of issues. If you're interested in asking any questions during the webinar, there is a button at the bottom of the screen called Ask a Question, where you can type them in. You can also vote if you want, a question that's already been asked, and the questions with the more votes are going to be more likely to be used in the webinar. There's also a poll with 2 questions at the bottom. What are students' main concerns regarding accommodation, and what percentage of usual UK PAN cohort are likely to plan travel within the next 6 months, according to your experience? So if you want to vote on that as well, it will give everyone who's attending sort of a good idea of how other people at the webinar are feeling. So to start off with, we have Uman Gandesha, who is the head of sales at the Londonist. From the Londonist, we also have Dinara Suleimanova, who is the area manager for Russia and CIS. We also have Jan Kappa, who's the CEO of College and University Business Officers, KUBO. And we also have one more panelist who I will invite up later because we can only have 4 people on the screen at once. And that's Lawrence Jackson, who's the head of sales at International House London. So we're going to start with just giving each panelist 2 to 3 minutes to introduce themselves, their company, and talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted their business. Maybe ask a few questions and have a little bit of discussion. And then the last half an hour, we're going to use to get audience questions. So, Umar, should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Callum, for the introduction. And first of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all your viewers. So, as Callum said, my name is Uman. I'm head of sales at Londonist. Firstly, I'd just like to say a big thank you to the PI for allowing us to host this webinar. So just a little bit of background about Londonist for those that don't know. So Londonist is a student accommodation agency, and we're located in central London. And since 2013, we've been providing our clients with both short-term and long-term accommodation from 2 weeks up to 51 weeks. Londonist now has over 24 locations across London with both stylish ensuite and studio rooms. And we've also recently expanded our portfolio into Dublin as well. Londonist also offers extra services such as insurance, kitchen packs, bathroom packs, and airport transfers. So our headquarters is based in London, but we've also recently opened our offices in Istanbul and Shanghai. So yeah, just to touch on the COVID period, I hope everyone's keeping safe. First of all, obviously it's been a difficult time for all businesses across the world. Especially being in the accommodation sector, it's extremely important for us. I'll just give you a bit of brief what's happened. A lot of our students left the country, before this lockdown was put in place. And after that happened, we needed to put a lot of precautions into place, such as safe and increased cleaning for students. And also, we did get in touch with every single one of our students. What's quite different about Londonist is that we actually manage our operations in-house. So the first stage was to get in touch with every single one of our students and clients and see, their safety and where they had gone. But obviously, we'll touch more on this later in the webinar. So yeah, that's just a little introduction about Londonist. And yeah, thank you for, again, the opportunity.
Great. Dinar, should we go over to you next?
Thank you very much. My name is Dinara Suleimanova. I'm Russian sales area manager. And first of all, I want to say big thanks to PI for this opportunity to speak and to host this webinar. And that's great to have such a great community in terms of in these times of crisis. And of course, thanks to our attendees. We are looking forward to your questions. So just to touch up upon the COVID situation, we did monitor government guidelines in terms of health and safety, and we managed to ensure health and safety measures in our residences. And thanks to our fantastic teams on site, we managed to ensure that every student was keeping safe in our properties. And of course, during these times, we introduced special measures that we will touch upon a bit later.
Let's start with you guys at the Londonist. Maybe you can talk a bit about, like, you know, how many sites do you have open at the moment? Are some proving more popular than others? Talk about, like, what are people looking for at the moment if they're looking for accommodation? Umang, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys? Yeah. We've got and what's really important at the moment is that, you know, there's a shift towards a lot of students looking for studio rooms, and residential. You know, residential accommodation is so important at the moment because central locations that we offer, you know, students expect a lot of facilities from us, such as, you know, the gyms, the communal areas, and with what's happened with COVID at the moment, there's a massive change where students are actually looking for accommodation closer to their universities and closer to underground stations. So what we find is, you know, the fact that we've got 24 different locations, we really strategically look at the locations where we're placing them. So students are looking for three main things. Number one is affordability. Secondly is, you know, the location of the actual accommodation to their uni, because a lot of people that are coming back to us now, they don't actually want to, you know, they don't want to commute on public transport, such as, you know, the tubes and buses. And finally, is also about that student experience. I think one thing that doesn't change is that student experience. You know, students are still, especially the freshers that are coming to London, they really want that kind of mix. So the kind of transition we've seen, actually, because the good thing about London is we offer both studios and ensuite rooms. A lot of parents that we're in touch with, they want the private studios for their students. And we've kind of seen a transition, you know, a lot of host families, I mean, that safety that we have in our accommodations kind of moved away from there. So, I mean, everything that we're doing at the moment is really following with the government advice and self-quarantine kind of processes at the moment, you know. For example, we've got out-of-hours emergency contacts. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question briefly, we've really seen a transition to a lot of students wanting to book studio rooms, kind of private accommodation with private kitchens as well. So this is the kind of transition that we're seeing at the moment at Londonist. And I mean, we're really happy that we can obviously, provide flexible tenancy lengths. So the fact that we're a short-term provider, we've really seen a change where during the months of May and June, we really see a lot of students normally asking for long-term tenancy lengths, such as 43 weeks, 51 weeks. But with what's happened with COVID, we've seen that, you know, a lot of students are a bit, you know, kind of afraid to get into long-term tenancy lengths. They're kind of wanting to book short-term. So at the moment, we do a lot of statistics at Londonist. We're finding that the average booking now in London is around 24 weeks. And we've seen a massive shift from our ensuite rooms to studio rooms, which is actually really interesting. You know, I think it's parallel to what's happening with COVID. So that's the kind of insights that we're getting at the moment. You know, a lot of parents are worried about students sharing, but, you know, that's the kind of things that we can offer. And then the last thing I want to touch on is the kind of flexible installment plans that we offer at Londonist. You know, a lot of accommodation agencies and providers, you know, take full payments up front or don't really offer that flexibility. Even with what's happened currently at the COVID, you know, a lot of people have been hit financially. So at Londonist, we've kind of really understood the market where students and parents would need this kind of flexibility to kind of proceed going on in the future.
And in terms of sort of policies you're putting into place, how are you accommodating students that need to self-isolate or quarantine, or if one of them does get COVID-19, what measures are you preparing?
Yes, sure. If you allow me to reply to this question.
Yeah, sure.
Basically, we have a strategy to make sure that we can handle First of all, our automation team and our teams on site are fully prepared to assist. So whenever we have this kind of case, we have to isolate students and to assist with any deliveries, waste removal, for example, or any other mental health support. So we make sure that we follow government advice in that sense. And we did take precautions. We have social bubbles in place. We don't allow any guests at the moment to visit our residents on site. And in terms of mental health, I would like to mention that our Londonist team has been cooperative by offering social media engagement with students, trying to keep the spirits up, and offer them live performance as well.
What sort of live performances?
We have our beautiful Turkish singer Sirel, who was used to sing every Friday for our students, whichever song they would like to listen to. And in that sense, we would like to mention that our residencies have great facilities on site. We have social space and we have outdoor garden area. Yes, at the moment, most of our amenities are closed because we try to follow the government advice. And the frequency of cleaning that we're exercising at the moment is increased, of course, as well, because it's important to keep commonly touched items like doors, like buttons and other stuff clear during this time. So in that sense, we make sure we have safeguards in place and risk assessment.
And in the case of a student contracting COVID-19, what sort of procedures do you have in place?
Yeah, first of all, this is self-isolation according to the government rule. Self-isolation, and we will try to reduce, we will ask students to reduce any kind of deliveries apart from essential ones. So our operation team is fully prepared to help with waste removal, for example, and with other assistance. And in that sense, we can say that students prefer at the moment to live in PBSA buildings, privately built accommodations, because they have additional support in these buildings, while non-manageable home stays and, for example, home shares wouldn't have this facility. We have 24-hour security on site to help students with whatever question they have during their isolation period. And of course, we make sure that to control social bubbles in all our properties.
And yeah, Canan, just to add to that, I mean, I think it's quite important to add that, for example, we've got a great healthcare system in the UK, like, for example, the NHS in the UK guarantees free treatment for anyone that contracts COVID on site. And it's important for us to kind of give that message to, we're working with a massive client base from around the world, whether it be China, Russia, India, and then many of them are not aware of that, So it's actually really important to deliver not only our Londonist message, but also what the government is doing. It's really important to deliver that message to them.
Lawrence, let's talk with you. Can you just tell us a bit about how you work with Londonist and how International Harris works with accommodation providers in general?
Yeah. So in the common means of our cooperation is essentially where the language school, so IH London, has taken on allocations with accommodation providers directly, and that's been the common model, if you like, over the years. As we've grown our business and aggressively been marketing our services, there has been an additional need for residential accommodation, which we've been unable to satisfy. And we've increasingly been looking to external partners to help us fulfill that. So we've been working with Londonist for a number of years. They help us essentially to add to our inventory. So where we have a surplus of interest, they're quite flexible in terms of affording us certain rooms on a short-term, mid-term, or long-term stay. So whilst we have our own allocations and our own commitments with providers directly, we are seeing increasing demand which we're unable to service ourselves. Going forward, I think the relationship may change somewhat and see schools like ourselves be, essentially not commit as much as they may have in the past with providers directly and use an intermediary such as Londonist, simply because the risk profile is reduced and the flexibility in terms of the terms are usually more favorable than we can guarantee with the providers directly. And that's simply because they work on a high volume model, whereas our volumes may be somewhat smaller in comparison. So I think there'll be a shift in the way that we as an institution work with our providers, but also the industry as a whole. That's looking at it from an EFL perspective and less so from the from the university side, as maybe Jan can talk about.
In terms of EFL students, I mean, what are the main sort of concerns they have about accommodation or coming to the UK? What's the main things you're hearing?
It's there's a number of different concerns. I guess it depends on the stakeholder. So if you're communicating with the student directly or with their with their next of kin or parent, then welfare is their number one concern. And that's welfare in terms of what precautions is the institution putting into place to ensure the welfare of their students on site. And if they are booking accommodation, how does that look like in terms of the logistics? So I think primarily the concerns that we're getting is what do things look like in school? What is the new normal in terms of studying? Will I be studying online? Will it be a mixture? How large will my classroom be, etc., etc. On the accommodation side of things, I think you're looking mainly at cleanliness. How often do those residences provide sweeps or cleans? If communal spaces are used, what precautions are taken into consideration? And should there be a need for quarantining, then how is the school or the residents able to assist with providing a solution which enables the student to quarantine? So it does depend on who you're speaking to. I mean, agents may have completely differing concerns about financial stability of the organizations that they're sending their students to. So it really depends on the stakeholder who you're talking to as to what their concerns might be.
And have you seen the expectations of clients and stakeholders change over the last few months?
Yeah, I think so. I think for speaking from an EFL perspective, where we're an industry governed or managed by a number of small, medium-sized enterprises. There's a few big chain players with very deep pockets, but by and large, it's an industry. It's a cottage industry, and I think there is a great deal of concern as to how viable some of these businesses have become. So there's obviously a very real need for them to change the way that they run and operate, and outsourcing some of their accommodation is obviously a smart thing to do, because they need to reduce their exposure to uncertainty. So yeah, we've seen some nervousness among agents, and then with the parents, I think we're seeing more caution as to when their children are able to travel again, and when it's deemed safe to do so. So it's a bit of a waiting game, to be honest. I mean, we don't have all of the answers to everybody's questions. The regulations keep changing. There are updates pretty frequently with the UK government. Some policies tend not to stick for a great deal of time. So that uncertainty adds to the the questions that we receive. But we do follow, just like Londonist and the other partners. We follow government guidelines as to how we should operate.
And have you had any students that have remained in the UK since the outbreak?
Yeah, not a great deal. So a lot of our students obviously returned home. Some of our long-term students have decided to stay on, and some of those are in our accommodation, and that is homestay or even residence. So they've taken to studying online and continued to do so, depending on how comfortable they felt with the situation. They wanted to stay on. Some have tried to return home, where flights have been made available. But there is a feeling of community, despite us not being able to interact, physically. There's a great deal that happens online, between the students and socially, that enables them to feel as though they are part of a student body, and that their voice is being heard, and that they have the support that they need should they need it. So I can imagine it can be very isolating for an international student. So accommodation being being, you know, the place where they'll be spending all of their time, it's so important that the providers are able to support us in making sure that the students are well looked after.
Okay, shall we move on to try and have a look at some of the questions people are asking? So one of the top questions, Umang, if I ask you, how will operators deal with the government's 14-day quarantine measures?
Yeah, I mean, with the 14-day quarantine measure, I think it's quite important to kind of, you know, really understand what's going on at the moment, because at the moment we've kind of, well, as I said, we've got a massive international base of students going from around the world, you know, and we've really looked into the statistics of what's going on. For example, you know, the 14-day period, you know, we've had some suggestions of actually having some floors just for people just to self-isolate. But what we found with our kind of figures at the moment, you know, nearly half of the students, for example, from China and over a third from India at the moment are not actually until they begin online.
Can you do the mute thing you were doing before? Because there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yep, perfect.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as we touched upon earlier in the actual webinar, you know, the cleanliness throughout our location has always been extremely important. You know, as I said, we've got our own operations team that's fully prepared to handle any kind of case if the student contracts COVID, and then we've had a kind of internal strategy within our site teams to, you know, assist any students should they need anything. What's quite interesting, what of you guys may not know, we've got a QR code in each of our rooms, which is that absolute fantastic kind of innovation that we've created. So every student that checks into our rooms will have a QR code both on their desk and behind the door. What they can do, they can scan that QR code with their phone, and anything they need, for example, if they need any emergency services, if they need anything they need, we would get an instant message to our operations team. And kind of what's actually quite important, as I said, we've got offices globally. So our online live chat system covers all time zones, which is quite important because, you know, we've got questions for people around the world, you know, parents at different times. And what we can really do, we can really deliver that message to everyone that's asking. And just finally, what I wanted to say is that, you know, further to the government guidelines from the 13th of June, you know, this support network, you know, we've really created a really good support network for the students. You know, we call it like a student bubble. You may have heard of it. You know, that's for people that have been impacted by the current, you know, restrictions. You know, not only do people kind of contract COVID, they may have some mental health issues on site. And, you know, we did have some current students at the moment that are really struggling. You know, they're not in contact with their families. They don't have friends on site. So these are some of the developments that we've been kind of trying to establish at Londonist.
In terms of even before the students get to the accommodation, what sort of pre-arrival?
So pre-arrival, you know, at the moment, for example, we normally have welcome packs for all of our students, and that would include, you know, like a Bluetooth speaker. That would include like, I've got my special Londonist bottle here. What we've kind of moved over to is pre-arrival. We've made sure that all check-ins, we've got a kind of an operations team on site, just one person per location. And they're kind of doing kind of temperature checks for students. And secondly, we've got a welcome pack with a Londonist mask, hand sanitizer, and also we've got like I said, the QR code for the students, you know, so we're trying to put in all the measures in place before students arrive. As I said, you know, some borders, a lot of students are worried about their borders closing. And what we've introduced at Londonist is a frequently asked question page on our website. So there's a few questions, you know, a lot of students have. For example, if I book my room, do I have the right to cancel if I can't come to the UK due to the travel restrictions? And at Londonist, we're extremely flexible with both our partners and students. You know, for example, if there's travel restrictions in place and they're due to start, yes, we can amend their start dates. And, you know, what we found with a lot of universities, I think Lawrence can touch on it. We found a lot of universities have moved their start dates to October. And there's a lot of talk about blended learning at the moment. So, you know, for example, half the courses being online at the beginning and then the second term being in person or kind of a mixture. So what we're really trying to understand at the moment is where the students are going and, you know, what is actually needed. Are they actually going to be arriving in September? And then we're in touch with all of our kind of, you know, clients around the world to try and find out what's going on.
So do you know if those universities that are planning to do blended learning? that are planning for blended learning, are students still intending to travel to the country?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, for example, we've got great partners all over, all over the London. For example, we found a massive increase in mature students, so like 19 and above. And we also haven't seen a massive shift in students changing their universities closer to their home, which has actually been quite comforting for us. Our thoughts around the start dates are that a lot of universities are trying to make it as normal as possible, and encouraging as possible for freshers especially to start the campus on autumn start dates at the latest. So obviously that's quite encouraging. And then what we found again is that only a very small percentage of those surveyed online are actually in favor of online learning. I think parents are still paying the same amount of tuition fees. I don't think many unis have actually dropped their tuition fees. And at accommodation, what we're really finding is that in terms of start dates, they're actually opposed to the online learning. They actually want to be in the UK and actually having that kind of experience. I know myself, being a university student not too long ago, I mean, well, I say 5-6 years ago, that it was really important for me to kind of, for example, people are coming from globally, far away. I did touch upon the in-house UK students, but people are coming from, Russia, China, Thailand. They want to have that experience of, mingling with the students, making friends, and also having that kind of seminars where they can, learn from other people. So that's the kind of shift that we're seeing in the PBSA and also learning and university market.
And for you, Dinara, anything else to?
Yes. On that note, I would like to add regarding this quarantine period and self-isolation, going back to the question. So first of all, we made sure we prepared rooms. We had available rooms in every property, and we kept our lines of communication with agents open. Should they need to move students at last notice to any available room from homestays or from other properties. And in that sense, we also had out of hours emergency contact. Our QR plate which Uman has mentioned has been also of great help. Students, instead of going to reception area, they can just scan a barcode and report an issue, send the pictures, and then we get back. Our operations team will take an action on that. And of course, we listened to what agents were saying during this time, and to understand that this is not only one-way destination that pandemic actually affected, but the whole world. And this doesn't seem to be anticipated in any regulations. And therefore, we try to assist our agents as much as we can. We listen to what they asked us, and we try to move students to studio options. And of course, one of the main questions during this time is the affordability issue. Since we had quite a lot of students that were stuck in the country, they were trying to extend their stay in the residence. We offered them 50% off, and sometimes we try to manage to tailor according to the budget that students have, because we understand that they had limited resources in order to be able to stay, since we couldn't book flights back home. So in that case, we tried to assist our students as much as we could.
And parents as well, for either accommodation that International House provides or with your partners, what sort of measures are you putting in place for 14-day quarantines?
Sorry, would you repeat that?
The International House, in terms of either any accommodation that you have, allocations you have yourselves or with other providers, what sort of measures are you doing for 14-day quarantines where they're needed?
Well, like I mentioned before, I mean, it's very much a work in progress, because we don't anticipate to welcome students back to school for face-to-face teaching until September. We anticipate that the landscape will be slightly different then in terms of the quarantine. That being said, should we find ourselves in a situation where that needs to be offered, then we have a active student services support team who will be able to ensure that the students have everything that they need at their place of residence. So depending on who we work with and depending on where we have sourced that accommodation from, there may be support that we're able to call from. So if one of my students is with Dinara or Umgang, for instance, then I needn't really worry as to their welfare, given that they have a a system in place to manage that. Perhaps if that's directly with one of the residences themselves, then we'll be calling upon our student services team to ensure that they have the amenities that they need during that 14-day stay, and that they're kept occupied online with our, online learning whilst they're unable to study in the school. So it very much depends on who we would be working with. But I'm an optimist, so my glass is actually, it's half empty, but it's half full in my eyes. I think the circumstances in September will be a little bit more favorable in terms of study and travel for international students.
And are you still seeing interest from students wanting to stay with host families?
Absolutely, actually. I mean, I know it's contrary to what Umgang said, but we do still have a number of students that are interested in that type of accommodation. It very much depends on where they're from, So, your foolhardy Italian student is very much independent. They want to, live London to the full. They'll be in a residence. Your Japanese musician, they're coming for a long period of time. They probably want to experience British family life. So it really does depend. We have options available for all of those students, and in the cases where they will be going to homestay, we ensure that it's just one student per family, and there are measures in place to ensure that those students are safe. But en masse, on the whole, the market is leaning towards residential accommodation. I think it will continue to do so. I think it's now a buyer's market as well. There will be, a great deal of accommodation available for students to choose from. Ultimately, it will be a bit of a race to the bottom on the pricing side of things, I can imagine. As such, residential will become more and more popular. Why pay £240 per week to stay with a family when you can, pay the same or less to stay in Zone 2 or Zone 3 London? I mean, it's it very much depends on what you're hoping to experience as a part of your studies.
We touched a little bit on talking about measures for mental health among students, but perhaps we could just go into a little bit more detail about what procedures are in place to make sure students are coping okay, especially if they're in sort of self-isolation or quarantine. Dinara, would you like to start talking about that?
First of all, we made sure that during this time we had engagement with our students. From the first day, we called every single student to find out have they left the property back home, or are they in the property, to make sure that they feel safe. And in that sense, students of course prefer student residential accommodation because they have this additional support during this time. And we have our on-site managers on site, the reception, 24 hours in security. And with the help of live chat, students can just have any walk-in inquiry. And because we have our international team and offices in Beijing and Istanbul, that actually covers almost all the time zones, we are able to reply to any questions students have during this time.
And for example, if a student is, calls up and says that I'm feeling very unhappy, I'm feeling very depressed. I mean, what sort of things can you as an accommodation provider do to try and support them?
Yes, of course, we first of all get in touch with the student. We try to find the needs and try to manage students' expectations. I mean, one of the most important things to understand that accommodation is a service-based product, and we need to manage expectation of our students, of our agents. So first of all, it's a question of finding out what actually student needs during this time. And as we said, we had this social media engagement that actually helped the students to maintain their mental health. And because our properties has outdoor facilities, it's easier for students not to feel completely isolated. And we still interact with our students online during this time.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I mean, just to kind of touch upon that as well, Dinar. I mean, we're very much doing the same. IH London has gone through a program of training for their staff, for frontline staff who are dealing with students directly, and that means that, you know, they're now a little bit more well versed in terms of mental health, and have been fully trained to prepare for instances where students do need a little bit of extra support. So it's really a case of, you know, adapting and changing in terms of staffing and knowledge, and just being well prepared for those students and every eventuality. So yeah, similar to your side of things, I think, Dinara.
Yeah, if I may just touch on it as well. I mean, for example, you know, our
You've muted yourself, mate.
No, still muted.
Let me just speak for you. Oh yeah, now?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to add to it. I mean, you know, with health and mental wealth being such a paramount issue, you know, nowadays, some of our providers have also supported. They made an online kind of events platform. I know we did touch upon our own singer, but you know, this platform has been really designed to help students keep active as well. You know, it's not just about the mental health; it's also about physical. You know, it's not just about your mental health. You know, I think physical health also impacts your mental health. So this is really, you know, for example, there's live yoga classes going on at the moment. And at Londonist, we've been developing our student zone online. So what that means is any student that books through Londonist, for example, if they book a residence in, I don't know, Old Street, they would be able to meet people in Old Street at the same time they're booking. So it's actually, like I did touch upon the student bubbles a little bit, but for example, it's kind of creating a network within a network where students can actually interact with each other and actually kind of relate to each other. I think that's really important. You know, students are actually going through the same thing, you know, mentally. You know, it's a hard time for everyone, especially for young people in a different country. You know, I've studied abroad myself in Taiwan, and it's miles away from London. And, you know, I've felt it myself. You know, you struggle at times. You know, you're away from your family, and having a support network is so important. And that's why we've developed the student zone. You guys will be able to see it on our website. We can link anyone that needs to have a look at it later as well. So that's what we're trying to really see the future, not just of accommodation, but also what the students are thinking as well.
I'm going to ask a question from the audience that I thought was quite interesting. This is for everyone. They asked, is there a danger that residences are going too far and sanitizing the experience, e.g. no social spaces, and so putting off some potential students in the process? Would anyone like to take that question?
Yeah, I think I can start a little bit on it, because, you know, at Londonist, we're in touch with all of our students. You know, we get a lot of feedback from students. So it's quite interesting. I don't want to touch too much upon nationalities, but it's quite interesting. For example, I mean, I'm kind of looking after our Shanghai office, and a lot of Chinese students, they're actually okay with this kind of, you know, kind of isolation. But we find a lot of European students have actually kind of come back with that question. You know, for example, a lot of our Italian students, a lot of the Spanish students, they're dare I say, a little bit more social in that sense, you know, really outgoing. And what they're saying is that, you know, what's going to be happening with, like, you know, the live events that are usually going on in our residences, what's going to happen with the gyms. But on our side, it's kind of finding a balance. You know, okay, there's the online systems, but due to the government guidelines, we can't physically tell them that the gyms are going to open, or we can do, like, for example, there's normally a welcome party night when students arrive on the 5th of September. We can't physically tell them that's going to go ahead. You know, I think, as everyone knows, all bars in the UK are closed, all nightclubs are closed. How can we physically have a thing like that in the residence? So it's also finding a balance that, guys, yes, at the moment, you can't have that social interaction. But what we're really looking at is that, I'm glad to, I mean, most people will know that the UK has kind of relaxed some of these distancing rules. You know, the 2 meters has been dropped to 1 meter, and we're only in June at the moment. What is it, 23rd of June? Hopefully by September, that would have been relaxed a little bit more. And that's what we're trying to give that students, that kind of security that actually, look, we're moving away from this, and there's some positive news.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, these are very much temporary measures. You know, if you're an international student embarking upon an academic year program or even longer, you know, you've got at least another good portion of your studies to look forward to, where we will have resumed, some degree of normality. I think everybody has to accept that, they're chipping in now for the greater good and to protect each other and themselves. That does mean that there are some small sacrifices that need to be made, but their education is important, and it's not something that can be, waylaid. It can't be, indefinitely postponed until things are perfect. So, if obtaining those qualifications and that experience is important to you, then ultimately I think, those students will be mature about, taking a revised approach to what they can come to expect when they're, studying and living in London. I think that's probably what we would, well, that's what we're seeing from our students. I think there's an acceptance now, that things have changed and they won't return to what we knew, of the same scenarios in 2018 or 2019.
Lawrence, if I may just add to that as well, I think what is really obviously this COVID period's been kind of traumatic for everyone. I think where it hit, for example, if this coronavirus started now in like June, July, August, I think there would have been a panic, especially for the next academic year. And so in some sense, we've got to look on the positive side that actually there's been a period of few months where students have actually started to process in their brains that actually, look, this is what's happening. I understand the situation, and then this is what's going to go on. I think if it hit in like July or August, I think there would have been a massive panic in the industry. Obviously, it's affected our current academic year, but not to this extent that it could have potentially hit in the future,
Yeah, the onus is on the providers such as ourselves to plan for each of those eventualities and to help manage those expectations. And that's what everybody has been so busy working on. And you can see the institutions and accommodation providers that are forward thinking and customer focused and customer centric, who have made step changes to their business to ensure that their customer base understands now how things will work and what measures have been considered to ensure the experience is a beneficial one. So it's very much down to us, and obviously with Londonist, you can see that they've taken on that challenge, with great deal of confidence, I think.
Let's ask another question from the audience. How will you be covering the additional costs involved with providing more regular cleaning of accommodation? Are these costs going to be passed on to students? Anyone want to take that?
I'll leave that to the accommodation professionals.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just start, and I think Dina can kind of take over. As I said, there's a massive transition from the ensuite kind of demand to studios, but in terms of the extra kind of services, I think it's our kind of responsibility and kind of it's important as an accommodation provider to kind of provide these kind of services. So we're not increasing our rates for the next academic year to cover this at all. I don't think it's really that fair. I think everyone's aware of what's happened during this current academic year in terms of, providers kind of surrendering tenancies for their students, which is obviously a great feat. But going forward, I don't think it's fair for students to bear the costs of, for example, safety measures. It's our responsibility and our duty to provide that for not only the inbound UK students, but people coming abroad. They need to know that as an accommodation provider, I'm going to be going into this accommodation with both safety and security, and not an additional cost. It shouldn't be an additional cost, and that's one difference from Londonist. I do know of some accommodation agencies that have increased their rates slightly, for example, by £10 per week to kind of cover their costs. And I think it's important as an accommodation provider not to do that for the students. And like I said, it's about the confidence in booking with us.
Yes, and on that note, what Umang said, I would like to add that we were one of the first in the industry to introduce credit system. So we offered credit to those who have already left and whose contract hasn't finished yet. So in that sense, we tried to accommodate student needs. And affordability issue at the moment, also we're trying to sort this out and trying to arrange extensions. And thanks to our quite straightforward extension system, we can do this quite affordable our existing current students. And on that note, I would like to add also that regarding health and safety measures, since with the government regulations dated 13th of June, some of the residences already allow one of the guests to the social bubbles. And in that sense, we are trying to help and inform our students, keep them informed about these changes. And in terms of facilities as well, yes, our amenities are closed at the moment. But in the future, we are gradually will be opening them. We still expect some shift in social distancing. And of course, we will reduce the number of users in our social and communal spaces.
I'm going to ask one more question because we're starting to run out of time. Lauren, someone asked, could you please share your procedures for managing risks for international students and host families for the self-isolation period?
How long have you got?
Let's say calm down in a minute and a half.
I certainly can share them. I think it's probably an idea to share them in writing so that you've got, you know, an A to Z of the options or you know, the measures that have been put in place for the international students. It's not something that I have to hand, but we've got a, you know, risk assessment team that are working on making sure that each and every student is well looked after when they're in school and when they're in our accommodation. So I'm happy to forward that information within the group, and I'll just need to get that from the student services team.
We'll take one more question that's just come up. Due to COVID-19, what will the refund policy be? I assume they're talking about accommodation.
Well, for us, we've taken obviously a flexible view on new bookings. So we want to ensure that students are protected when they're taking the decision to book a course and book their associated accommodation with us. So we've made it very easy for a student to cancel with a very short window of notice period, if you like. So it's quite easy for students to book and then cancel within 1 week and not really incur, you know, any additional costs. So what we're trying to do is ensure that IH London and London as a destination educationally for international students is one which remains open and flexible and acknowledging of an ever-changing environment. And I think, I can't speak for Omang, but I'd imagine that they're quite flexible with their policies as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, similar to you guys, I think Claudia was just saying a message about that. So we've got a frequently asked questions page on our specific website. So for example, a lot of questions that came up was, can I defer my contract if my university or school start date is delayed? And then, for example, what we've come up with is that if your university start date has been delayed to October or January due to the pandemic, we are of course willing to defer your contract and your start date. Subsequently, you know, if your university further delays that start date due to the pandemic, because, you know, anything can change, we will again defer your contract as long as you let us know 4 weeks before your arrival. So I think that gives students, you know, more than enough time to kind of either A, cancel the contract if they cannot come, if borders are closed, for example, or B, just change your date. So we're kind of giving that flexibility. We did have some students, you know, they said, I can't come in September, I want to move my date to January, can I move it at the same accommodation at the same rate? And then we're happy to kind of do that for them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have an obligation as well to ensure that, you know, let's say we found ourselves in the unfortunate situation where our schools and institutions were to close once more and we had students here, they were unable to return home. You know, we have a duty of care to ensure that they are, you know, able to remain in their accommodation, and where, you know, where their insurers are unable to support them in terms of bearing the cost of that, you know, we make some concessions to ensure that is, you know, affordable for them. So that could be, you know, that could be us, you know, sharing, you know, the joint cost of that. So, you know, we have to be acknowledging of the fact that this can be, you know, quite a challenging period for students, and helping them to make a booking, helping them to, you know, be in a position to commit to study with us means that we do need to consider, you know, all of those eventualities and ensure that the student is not inconvenienced too much on a on a financial basis should things go wrong.
Okay, I'm conscious that we're overrunning slightly. So thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. I hope that it was useful. And thank you very much to Umang and Dinar from the Londonist, Lawrence from International Ads, and Jan as well from University Business Offices. Hope you all have a lovely afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you are. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.